Welcome to Saga Dream Tales, the place where you can relax, unwind, and drift into calm stories shaped by ancient world. Here, every tale moves slowly, carried by soft words and peaceful rhythm, made to ease your mind and guide you into a quiet space. In today's journey, we follow Baldur, the god of light and beauty, as he moves through a world of golden halls and ancient wisdom, where dreams carry warnings, and all of creation weeps for love. His path takes us from bright beginnings to the deepest darkness, and finally, to a new dawn in lands reborn. All you need to do now is sit back, breathe deeply, and let the story unfold at its own slow pace. Close your eyes if you wish, let your body settle into comfort, and allow yourself to be carried away to a time when gods walked among mortals, and every living thing held the power to shape destiny. The journey begins now. Long ago, in the time before time was counted, in the realm above all realms, there lived the god. Their home was called Asgard, a place of golden halls and silver towers that reached toward the endless sky. Among these gods, there lived a couple whose love was known throughout all the 9 worlds. Odin was his name, the father of all, the one who saw with a single eye into the depths of fate itself. Frigg was her name, the mother of all, the one who knew the threads of destiny, but kept her wisdom locked within her heart. In the quiet of a spring morning, when the first birds sang their songs, and the dew still clung to every blade of grass, a child was born to them. This child came into the world, wrapped in a light so pure and gentle, that even the sun seemed dim by comparison. His skin glowed with the soft radiance of moonlight on fresh snow. His hair shone like spun gold, each strand catching the light and throwing it back into the world, twice as bright. His eyes held the blue of the clearest summer sky, the blue of deep water where no darkness dwells. They named him Baldur, which means the brave one, the bold one. But from the very first moment he opened his eyes and looked upon the world, those who saw him knew he was something more than brave. He was beauty itself, walking in the form of a child. As Baldur grew, so too did the light around him. Wherever he walked, flowers bloomed beneath his feet. When he laughed, the sound was like bells ringing across a quiet valley, clear and pure and full of joy. The other gods loved him beyond measure, for in his presence, all dark thoughts fled away. Anger melted like snow in summer. Jealousy faded like mist before the morning sun. Even the coldest hearts grew warm when Baldur was near. His mother, Frigg, watched him with love that filled her completely, but also with something else. A mother's worry, perhaps. A knowledge that beautiful things in this world are often fragile things. She held him close when he was small, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, feeling the warmth of his small body against hers. She whispered prayers to the fates, asking them to be kind, to be gentle, to let this light remain in the world for all of time. His father Odin watched him with pride, but also with the heavy weight of knowing too much. Odin had drunk from the well of wisdom. He had given his eye to see what others could not see. He looked at his son and saw brightness, yes, but he also saw shadows gathering at the edges of things. He saw the way the threads of fate were weaving themselves into patterns that troubled him. But he said nothing, for what could be said? The future would come whether they spoke of it or not. Baldur had a brother, Hod, who was born into darkness. Where Baldur could see all things clearly, Hod saw nothing at all. He lived in a world of night, of touch and sound and smell, but never of sight. Yet there was no jealousy between them. Hod loved his brother with a pure and simple love, and Baldur loved him in return, guiding his steps, describing the world in words that painted pictures in the darkness, sitting beside him in companionable silence when words were not enough. The days of Baldur's youth were days of endless summer. He learned the arts of the gods, how to ride the horses that could gallop across the sky, how to handle weapons though his gentle nature made him reluctant to use them, how to speak the old words of power that shaped reality itself. He learned the stories of the world, how it came to be, how the first gods had made it from the body of a giant, how the tree Yggdrasil held all the realms together in its roots and branches, how everything was connected to everything else in ways both seen and unseen. But most of all, Baldur learned kindness. It came to him as naturally as breathing. He could not pass a wounded bird without stopping to heal it. He could not see suffering without wanting to ease it. When the other young gods played rough games and someone fell hurt, it was always Baldur who helped them up, who checked their wounds, who sat with them until they felt better. His kindness was not weakness, though some mistook it for such. It was a strength of a different sort, the strength of a gentle rain that nourishes rather than destroys, the strength of a soft light that guides rather than blinds. Hush hush, the hall of Breidablik. When Baldur came of age, he built himself a hall. It stood in a meadow where no evil thing could come, where no cruel word could be spoken, where no violence could occur. He called it Breidablik, which means broad gleaming, for its walls were so pure and bright that they seemed to glow with their own inner light. The roof was made of silver, and on it were carved runes of protection, of peace, of blessing. No lies could be told beneath that roof. No hatred could survive within those walls. Inside Breidablik, everything was simple and beautiful. There were no great treasures hoarded, no gold piled high, no jewels scattered about. Instead, there were things of simple beauty: fresh flowers in clay pots, clean water in wooden cups, soft wool blankets woven in patterns that pleased the eye, shelves of books where wisdom was kept, windows that let in the light from every direction so that shadows could never gather in the corners. Baldur lived there in quiet happiness. Each morning he would rise with the sun and walk through his meadow, greeting each flower and tree as if they were old friends. He would speak to the birds and the small creatures that made their homes there. He would sit by the stream that ran through his land and listen to the water tell its stories of where it had been and where it was going. People came to visit him, as people will always come to visit those who radiate peace. They came with their troubles and their worries, their fears and their angers. They would sit with Baldur in his hall, and somehow, in his presence, their burdens seemed lighter. He rarely gave advice, for he knew that most people already know in their hearts what they need to do. Instead, he listened. He let them speak until all the words were out, and in the silence that followed, in the gentle light of his hall, they would find their own answers. The gods loved to visit Breidablik. Odin would come and sit in silence with his son, the two of them watching the sun move across the sky, thinking thoughts too deep for words. Frigg would come and bring news from the other halls, gossip and stories, the small happenings that make up the texture of life. Thor would come, loud and boisterous, filling the hall with his energy, but even Thor would grow quiet after a while, soothed by the peace of the place. Loki would come too, though less often, and he would seem uneasy there, as if the purity of the place made him uncomfortable, as if it showed him things in himself he did not want to see. Baldur took a wife, as young gods do. Her name was Nanna, and she was beautiful in a different way than Baldur was beautiful. Where his beauty was bright and obvious, hers was gentle and subtle. She had the beauty of a forest in the early morning, of mist rising from a lake, of the first star appearing in the evening sky. She loved him completely, and he loved her in return, with all the depth and steadiness of his nature. Together they made a life in Breidablik. They tended the gardens together. They walked through the meadows hand in hand. They sat together in the evenings and talked of simple things, or sat in comfortable silence and did not talk at all. They had a son, whom they named Forseti, and he grew to be a god of justice, fair and wise, inheriting the best qualities of both his parents. The years passed gently, one flowing into the next like water in a stream. Baldur grew in wisdom and in grace. His light did not dim but seemed to grow brighter with each passing season. He became known throughout all the 9 worlds as the best of the gods, the most loved, the most pure. Stories were told of his kindness. Songs were sung of his beauty. Mothers would tell their children to be like Baldur, to be gentle and good and true. But in the world, nothing remains the same forever. The seasons turn, the stars wheel through the sky, and fate, which has been sleeping, eventually wakes and stretches and begins to move. Hush, hush, the dreams begin. It started with dreams. Bad dreams. Dark dreams. Dreams that made no sense, but left a feeling of wrongness behind them when Baldur woke. He had never had such dreams before. His sleep had always been peaceful, filled with pleasant images, or empty of images altogether, just deep rest and restoration. But now, when he closed his eyes, shadows came. In his dreams, he saw darkness closing in. He felt cold, so cold, colder than winter, colder than ice. He heard voices calling to him from far away, but he could not understand their words. He felt himself falling into something vast and empty and terrible. He reached out for help, but his hands grasped nothing. He tried to call out, but no sound came from his throat. He was alone in a darkness so complete that it seemed to swallow even the idea of light. Each morning he would wake, gasping, his heart racing, his body covered in cold sweat. Nana would hold him and comfort him, but even in her arms, even in the safety of Breidablik, the feeling of wrongness lingered. It clung to him like cobwebs, like smoke, like a bad smell that would not wash away. At first he said nothing to anyone except Nana. He did not want to worry his parent. He did not want to disturb the peace of Asgard with his trouble. Perhaps, he thought, the dreams would pass. Perhaps they meant nothing at all. But they did not pass. Night after night they came, and each time they were worse, darker, more vivid. The feeling of doom grew stronger. Finally, he could bear it no longer. He went to his mother Frigg and told her of his dreams. She listened with growing concern, her face growing pale as he spoke. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, looking at him with eyes full of fear and love. She knew what dreams like this meant. In the old times, before the world was fully formed, dreams were messages. They were warning. They were prophecies trying to make themselves known. Dreams of darkness and cold and falling. These were dreams of death. Frigg felt her heart clench within her chest. Not this, she thought. Not him. Not her beautiful son, her best-loved child, the light of all the worlds. She could not let it happen. She would not let it happen. If the fates themselves had decided that Baldur must die, then she would fight the fates. A mother's love is stronger than destiny. It must be. She went to Odin and told him of Baldur's dream. Odin listened and said nothing, but his face grew grim. He had feared this. The threads of fate that he had seen weaving themselves into troubling patterns were beginning to pull tight. The future he had glimpsed in the waters of the Well of Wisdom was beginning to unfold. He traveled far to seek more knowledge. He rode his 8-legged horse Sleipnir to the very edges of the world, to places where the wise women lived, to places where the dead could speak. He performed rituals and spoke words of power. He asked questions of the earth and the sky. And everywhere he went, the answer was the same. Baldur would die. It was written. It was fated. It would come to pass. But when would it happen? By whose hand? In what manner? These things were harder to see. The future is not a simple road, but a maze of branching paths. Every choice, every action, every moment creates new possibilities. The exact shape of events could not be clearly seen, only the endpoint, only the death. And Odin returned to Asgard heavy with this knowledge. He told Frigg what he had learned, though it broke his heart to speak the words. She listened with her face like stone, not weeping, not speaking, just taking in the terrible truth of it. But Frigg was not one to simply accept what fate decreed. She was a goddess of the hearth and home, yes, but also a goddess of wisdom in her own right. She had her own magic, her own power, her own ways of protecting what she loved. If the world itself would take her son from her, then she would make the world itself swear not to harm him. Hush, hush. The Great Quest. Frigg prepared herself for a journey unlike any she had taken before. She would travel throughout all of creation, to every corner of every realm, and she would extract oaths of protection. Everything that existed would swear not to harm Baldur. Every creature, every plant, every stone, every force of nature, all of it would promise to keep him safe. She began her journey in Asgard itself, speaking to the other gods. They loved Baldur as much as she did, and they swore willingly, gladly. They would never harm him, not with weapon, or word, or deed. Next, she went to the warriors in Valhalla, the great hall where those who died in battle feasted forever. They swore their oaths, These brave men who knew the value of a good and gentle soul in a harsh world. From Asgard, Frigg descended to Midgard, the realm of humans. She walked among them, unseen or in disguise, speaking to kings and farmers, to warriors and shepherds, to mothers and children. She spoke to entire villages and to lonely hermits in distant mountains. All of them, when they understood who Baldur was and what she was asking, swore gladly. Some had heard tales of his kindness. Others simply responded to the love and desperation in this mother's voice. But all promised not to harm the shining god. She traveled to the forests and spoke to every tree. The great oaks with their deep roots and ancient wisdom. The slim birches with their silver bark. The pines that stood green even in winter. The willows that wept by the water's edge. Every tree, from the mightiest to the smallest sapling, gave its word. Not one branch would strike him. Not one root would trip him. Not one thorn would pierce his skin. She went to the mountains and spoke to the stone. The massive boulders that had stood since the world was young. The sharp cliffs and jagged rocks. The smooth pebbles and riverbed. The grains of sand on distant beaches. All of them, in the slow and patient language of stone, swore their oaths. No rock would fall upon him. No stone would bruise him. She spoke to the metals deep in the earth. Iron and copper, gold and silver, steel and bronze. All the metals from which weapons are forged, from which tools are made. They promised not to cut him, not to pierce him, not to harm him in any way. The blacksmiths of the world wondered why. For a brief time, their forges seemed to glow with an unusual light, but they did not know that the mother of a god was passing through their materials, gathering promises. She traveled to the waters, the great oceans that circled Midgard, filled with monsters and mysteries, the rivers that ran through every land, the lakes, both great and small, the springs and streams and waterfalls, the rain in the clouds and the dew on the grass. All the water in all the world promised not to drown him, not to freeze him, not to do him any harm. She went to the creatures of the world, to the great animals and the small, to the wolves that hunted in packs and the eagles that soared alone, to the horses and the cattle, the sheep and the goats, the deer in the forests and the fish in the seas, to the bears in their caves and the foxes in their den, to the snakes that slithered and the insects that crawl. Every living thing that could possibly cause harm was made to swear an oath. No tooth would bite him. No claw would scratch him. No sting would pierce him. No poison would affect him. She spoke to the forces of nature, to the fire that burned and the ice that froze, to the wind that blew and the lightning that struck, to the thunder and the storm, to the heat of summer and the cold of winter. All of them gave their word. They would recognize Baldur and would not harm him. She even spoke to the diseases and the natural ways that life ends, the fevers and the chills, the failing of the heart and the stopping of the breath. All the natural ways that death comes were made to pass Baldur by. He would not fall to illness or age or accident. The journey took a long time. Seasons passed as Frigg traveled from realm to realm, speaking to everything, extracting oaths from all of creation. It was exhausting work, but she did not stop. Every time she felt tired, she thought of Baldur's dreams, of his fear, of the darkness closing in. She thought of his gentle smile and his kind word. She thought of losing him, and the thought gave her strength to continue. Finally, when she had traveled to every corner of creation, when she had spoken to everything that existed, she returned to Asgard. She was weary beyond words, but there was triumph in her eyes. She had done it. She had made all of existence swear to protect her son. She went to Baldur and told him what she had done. He listened with wonder and gratitude, but also with a touch of sadness. He did not want to be a burden. He did not want his mother to have traveled so far and worked so hard on his behalf. But Frigg held his face in her hands and told him that there is nothing a mother would not do to protect her child. It was not a burden. It was love. The word spread throughout Asgard that Baldur was now invulnerable. Nothing could harm him. He was protected by all of creation itself. The gods rejoiced. The darkness of his dreams seemed to lift. Perhaps fate had been thwarted. Perhaps the doom that had been approaching had been turned aside. Perhaps love and determination had proven stronger than destiny. Hush hush the games. It began as a celebration. The gods gathered in the great field outside the halls of Asgard to honor Baldur and to test this new invulnerability. What started as a simple demonstration quickly became a game, and the game became a favorite pastime of all the gods. They would ask Baldur to stand in the center of the field, and then they would throw things at him. Stones at first, small ones. The stones would fly through the air and strike Baldur, but instead of hitting him, they would swerve aside at the last moment, or bounce off harmlessly, or simply fall to the ground before reaching him. It was as if an invisible shield surrounded him, as if the very air around him refused to let harm approach. Then they tried larger stones. Same result. The stones would not hurt him. They tried shooting arrows at him. The arrows would veer away in mid-flight, or shatter against nothing, or simply lose all their force and tumble harmlessly to his feet. They threw spears. They swung swords. They hit him with clubs and staffs. Nothing worked. Nothing could harm him. The gods laughed with delight. Thor, the mighty god of thunder, hit Baldur with his huge fists, blows that could shatter mountains. Baldur stood there smiling, feeling nothing more than a gentle breeze. The warriors tried their best weapons, forged by the finest smiths, enchanted with powerful magic. None of it mattered. Baldur was untouchable. It became a game they played often. Whenever the gods gathered, someone would suggest throwing things at Baldur. It was fun, harmless fun. Baldur himself did not mind. He stood there patiently, even cheerfully, as his friends and family threw everything imaginable at him. He could see how much joy it brought them. He could see how it eased the fear that had gripped Asgard when his bad dreams had begun. If this silly game made everyone happy and confident, then he was glad to participate. Even Baldur found something reassuring in it. Each time something struck him and caused no harm, each time a weapon bounced away harmlessly, he felt the fear from his dreams recede a little further. Perhaps they had just been dreams after all. Perhaps there was no doom approaching. Perhaps his mother's love and determination had truly saved him from whatever dark fate had been creeping close. Odin watched these games but did not participate. He stood at the edge of the field, his single eye thoughtful, his face troubled. He knew too much. He had seen too deeply into the workings of fate. He knew that nothing in this world is ever certain, that every bright thing has a shadow, that every joy carries within it the seed of sorrow. But he said nothing. What could he say? Let them have their happiness while it lasted. Frigg watched too, and she felt her heart grow lighter with each passing day. Her great quest had succeeded. Her son was safe. The universe itself had sworn to protect him. She began to believe that the future Odin had glimpsed might not come to pass after all. Perhaps there were some things even fate could not accomplish against a mother's love. But there was one who watched the games with different eyes. Loki, the trickster, the shapeshifter, the one who could never quite fit into the order of things. He watched Baldur stand there, smiling and untouchable, and something twisted inside him. It was not exactly jealousy, though there was perhaps some of that. It was not exactly hatred, though there was a touch of that too. It was something more complicated, darker, harder to name. Loki had always been an outsider among the gods, even though they called him friend, even though Odin had made him a blood brother long ago. He was different from them. Where they were straightforward, he was devious. Where they were honest, he was cunning. Where they followed rules, he bent and broke them. He had caused trouble before, many times, though usually his tricks were harmless in the end, sometimes even helpful. But there was a darkness in him that sometimes grew stronger, a resentment of the world and its orderly ways, a desire to shake things up, to break things, to prove that nothing was as stable as it seemed. And now, watching Baldur stand there in perfect safety, watching all the gods laugh and play their game, watching the universe itself bend over backwards to protect this one shining being, Loki felt that darkness stir and grow. Why should Baldur be so special? Why should he alone be protected by all of creation? Why should everything love him so much? Loki began to brood on these thoughts, He told himself he was just curious. He just wanted to understand. He just wanted to know if Frigg had truly extracted oaths from absolutely everything. Surely she must have missed something. The universe is vast. Creation is infinite. How could she possibly have spoken to every single thing? The thought became a puzzle in his mind, and Loki loved puzzles. He loved finding the loopholes, the exceptions, the one thing everyone else had overlooked. He decided to find out if Frigg had missed anything, just to satisfy his curiosity, just to prove that perfection was impossible, just to be clever. Hush hush, the mistletoe. Loki transformed himself, taking on the appearance of an old woman, bent and wrinkled with age. In this disguise, he went to visit Frigg in her hall. She welcomed him kindly, as she welcomed all visitors, offering him a seat by the fire and a warm drink. They talked of small things at first, as strangers do. The weather and the crops, the news from various halls, the small gossip of daily life. Loki, in his old woman disguise, gradually steered the conversation toward Baldur and the games the gods were playing. Frigg spoke with pride of her son and of the great quest she had undertaken. She told the old woman how she had traveled throughout all of creation, how she had extracted oaths from everything, how Baldur was now protected by the universe itself. The old woman listened and nodded and made sounds of approval and amazement. Then, carefully, casually, as if the question had just occurred to her, the old woman asked if Frigg had truly spoken to everything. Absolutely everything. Surely that was impossible? Frigg thought for a moment, reviewing in her mind the long journey she had taken, all the places she had been, all the things she had spoken to. Yes, she said, everything. Every tree and stone, every creature and force of nature, every metal and water and plant. Everything. The old woman nodded slowly. Even the little plant, she asked. Even the mosses and mushrooms? Even the small growing things that people barely notice? Frigg paused. Well, she said, almost everything. There was one plant she had not bothered with. It was so small, so young, so harmless. It did not even grow from the ground like other plants, but instead grew on the branches of trees high up where it could barely be reached. It was called mistletoe, a pale and delicate thing with white berries and soft leaves. It seemed too young and too weak to possibly cause harm. She had thought it not worth the effort to extract an oath from such an insignificant thing. The old woman nodded again, as if this was just an interesting piece of information, nothing more. They talked of other things for a while, and then the old woman thanked Frigg for her hospitality and her conversation, and took her leave. As soon as Loki was away from Frigg's hall, he changed back to his true form. A smile played on his lips, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who has found what he was looking for, who has solved the puzzle, who has discovered the one flaw in something that seemed perfect. He went to find the mistletoe. He traveled to the forests where it grew, high in the branches of the oak trees. It was just as Frigg had said, pale and delicate, clinging to the bark, feeding on the life of the tree. He reached up and carefully cut down a branch of it, choosing his piece with care. It was not much, just a thin stem with a few leaves and berries. It looked harmless, like nothing at all, but Loki knew better. This was the one thing in all of creation that had not sworn an oath to protect Baldur. This was the exception. This was the key. He took the mistletoe back to Asgard and shaped it into a dart, thin and straight and sharp. All the while he worked, a part of him knew what he was doing was wrong. A part of him said to stop, to throw the thing away, to forget the whole idea. But another part of him, the darker part, the part that resented the order of things and wanted to see what would happen if that order was disrupted, that part was stronger. He told himself he just wanted to see if it would work. He told himself it would probably do nothing at all, that Baldur's protection would extend even to this. He told himself many things, but deep down, he knew what he was doing. Hush, hush, the fatal game. The next time the gods gathered to play their game with Baldur, Loki was there, holding his mistletoe dart hidden in his cloak. The game proceeded as usual. The gods laughed and threw things and watched them bounce harmlessly away. Baldur stood in the center, smiling, patient, unharmed. Loki noticed that Baldur's brother Hod was standing at the edge of the gathering, not participating. This made sense, as Hod was blind and could not see where to throw or aim. But it gave Loki an idea, a terrible idea, a perfect idea. He approached Hod and spoke to him in a friendly voice. Why was he not joining in the fun? Would he not like to honor his brother like the others were doing? Hod said that he would like to, of course, but he could not see where Baldur was standing. He could not throw anything without risking hitting someone else by mistake. It was better that he simply stand aside. Loki said that he could help. He had a dart here, just a small thing, and he would guide Hod's hand. He would point him in the right direction. That way Hod could participate in honoring his brother just like everyone else. Would he not like that? Hod hesitated. There was something in Loki's voice that made him uneasy, though he could not say what it was. But the offer seemed kind. And he did want to honor Baldur, to be part of the celebration. It seemed wrong to stand aside when everyone else was showing their love and confidence in his brother's protection. Loki pressed the mistletoe dart into Hod's hand. He guided his arm, pointing it toward where Baldur stood. He told him to throw, and Hod threw. The dart flew through the air, pale and insignificant, just a small piece of plant matter. Nothing that should matter, nothing that should be able to harm anyone. But it had not sworn an oath. It was the one thing in all of creation that had not promised to protect Baldur. The dart struck Baldur in the chest, and it did not bounce away. It did not veer aside. It did not lose its force. It pierced him, and he fell. The laughter stopped. The game stopped. Everything stopped. For a moment, the world itself seemed to pause, unable to process what had just happened. It was not possible. Nothing could harm Baldur. The universe itself had sworn to protect him. And yet, there he lay, fallen. The pale mistletoe dart protruding from his chest. Nanna ran to him, crying his name. She fell to her knees beside him, trying to pull the dart out, trying to wake him, but it was too late. The light was already fading from his eyes. The glow that had always surrounded him was growing dim. He looked up at his wife, and for a moment he seemed to try to speak, to say something, but no words came. Then his eyes closed, and the light went out completely. Baldur the beautiful, Baldur the gentle, Baldur the best of all the gods, was dead. A wail went up from Nanna, a sound of such pure grief that it seemed to tear through the fabric of the world. The other gods stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. This could not be. This could not be real. But it was. Frigg collapsed, her strength leaving her. All her efforts, all her travels, all the oaths she had gathered, all of it had been for nothing. There had been one thing, just one small thing, that she had missed, and that one thing had been enough. Fate had found its way through, as fate always does. Odin stood like stone, his face empty of all expression, but inside he was screaming. He had known. He had seen it coming. But knowing and experiencing are different things. The pain was beyond anything he had imagined. Thor roared in anger and grief, looking for someone to fight, someone to punish, but there was no one. Just a pale dart and a fallen brother and the unimaginable weight of loss. Hod stood with his hands outstretched, not understanding what had happened, knowing only that something terrible had occurred, that the world had changed in an instant, that he had done something, though he did not know what. He began to weep, calling out for someone to tell him what was wrong, what had happened. And Loki, who had stood back to watch what would unfold, who had been curious to see if his plan would work, who had told himself he was just testing the limits of things, Loki now felt something he had not expected. He felt horror. He felt regret. He felt the weight of what he had done crash down upon him like a mountain. He tried to slip away unnoticed in the chaos and grief, but he could not escape the sight of what he had caused. It was burned into his mind forever. Hush the journey to Hel. The gods carried Baldur's body back to his hall, to Breidablik, where he had lived in peace and happiness. They laid him on his bed, and Nanna lay down beside him, holding him as she held him in sleep so many times before. But this time he did not breathe. This time he did not warm her with his warmth. He was cold and still and gone. They tried everything they could think of. They spoke words of healing. They used herbs and potions. They called upon every magic they knew. But death is not something that can be simply undone. When the thread of life is cut, it is cut. The body may remain, but the spirit has departed, gone to the realm of the dead, the cold and dark realm ruled by Hel, the goddess whose face was half beautiful and half corpse. Finally, when all their efforts had failed, when they had to accept that Baldur was truly gone, they began to plan his funeral. It would be the greatest funeral ever held. They would send him to the afterlife with all the honor and magnificence he deserved. They brought his ship, the great ship called Ringhorn, the largest ship ever built. They dragged it down to the shore, planning to fill it with treasures and offerings, and then set it ablaze, sending Baldur to the afterlife in a vessel of fire and glory. But as they prepared the ship, as they brought wood and treasures, and all the things that would accompany a god to the next world, Nanna's grief overwhelmed her completely. She could not imagine a world without Baldur in it. She could not imagine waking each morning and not seeing his face. She could not imagine growing old, while he remained forever young in death, forever separated from her. The pain in her heart was so great that it simply stopped beating. She died there, died of grief and heartbreak, died of a love too strong to survive its own loss. The gods wept anew at this second tragedy. They placed Nanna's body on the ship beside Baldur's, husband and wife together, as they had been in life. They brought Baldur's horse and placed it on the ship as well, that he might have a mount in the afterlife. They piled the ship with treasures, with beautiful things, with weapons and tools, and all manner of good. Not because Baldur needed such things, but because the living need to feel that they have done something, that they have given something, that their grief has found some expression. Thor stood at the prow of the ship and spoke words of blessing. Odin placed his ring Draupnir, the ring that produced 8 new rings every 9th night, on Baldur's arm. Frigg came and kissed her son's cold forehead one last time, whispering words that no one else could hear. All the gods came and said their farewells, each in their own way, each carrying their own particular weight of sorrow. When everything was ready, when the ship was piled high with offerings and the bodies were laid out in peace, they tried to launch the ship into the water, but the ship would not move. It was too heavy with grief, too laden with sorrow. They pushed and pulled, but Ringhorn would not budge from the shore. Finally, they sent word to the giantess Hirokin, who was said to be the strongest being in all the 9 worlds. She came riding on a giant wolf, using serpents for reins, a sight both terrible and magnificent. She dismounted and approached the ship. With a single push, she sent Ringhorn sliding down into the water so fast and so hard that sparks flew from the rollers and the earth shook. Thor, his emotions raw and his anger looking for any target, nearly struck her with his hammer for being so rough with his brother's funeral ship, but the other gods held him back. This was not the time for more violence. There had been enough destruction already. When the ship was floating on the water, they set it ablaze. The flames rose high into the sky, brilliant orange and red against the grey of grief. The smoke rose in a great column, visible from all the 9 worlds, a signal that something precious had been lost, that the world was dimmer now, that light had gone out of creation. The gods stood on the shore and watched the ship burn and drift away, carrying Baldur and Nanna to whatever lay beyond. They watched until the flames died down, until the ship was just a distant speck on the horizon, until finally it disappeared from sight altogether. And even then, many of them remained standing there, unable to tear themselves away, unable to accept that this was truly the end. But in the heart of Frigg, a thought was forming. Death was not necessarily the end. The dead went to Hel's realm, yes, but they were not destroyed. They still existed, just in another place, another form. If someone could travel to Hel's realm, if someone could speak to the goddess of death herself, perhaps an arrangement could be made. Perhaps Baldur could be returned. The idea was desperate and dangerous. No one traveled to Hel's realm and returned. It was the land of the dead, the place from which there was no escape. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Frigg called together the gods and spoke of her plan. She needed a volunteer, someone brave enough to ride down into the depths of the earth, into the cold and darkness of Hel's realm, to speak with the goddess herself and plead for Baldur's return. It would be a dangerous journey. The road to hell was long and treacherous, guarded by monsters and barriers, and there was no guarantee that hell would listen, let alone agree. Hermod, another of Odin's sons, stepped forward. He was called Hermod the Bold, and he was known for his courage and his speed. He said he would go. He would ride to hell, and he would bring back Baldur, if it was at all possible. Odin gave him Sleipnir, the 8-legged horse that could gallop faster than the wind, that could ride over land and sea, and even through the air. Hermod mounted the great horse and turned its head toward the north and down, toward the deep places where the sun never shone. He rode for 9 days and 9 nights. The way led down through dark valleys and darker caverns, through forests where no birds sang, through rivers that ran black and cold. The air grew colder with each passing mile. The darkness grew thicker. He could feel the weight of the earth above him, pressing down, could feel the closeness of death all around him. At last, he came to the river Goal, the boundary between the living world and the world of the dead. The river was crossed by a golden bridge, and on the bridge stood a maiden, the guardian of that place. Her name was Mogud, and she watched all who tried to pass. She challenged Hermod, asking him who he was, and why he rode so hard toward Hell's realm. He told her he was seeking Baldur, that he had come to plead with Hell for his brother's return. Mogud looked at him with eyes that were old beyond counting, and told him that yes, Baldur had passed this way, he and his wife together, riding in a chariot of the dead. They had crossed the bridge not long ago. If Hermod wished to follow, he might, but the way ahead was dangerous, and the return was uncertain. Hermod thanked her and rode on. He crossed the golden bridge, feeling it tremble beneath Sleipnir's 8 hooves. On the far side, the path led down to a great gate, high and strong, built to keep the living out and the dead in. Hermod did not slow. He urged Sleipnir forward, and the great horse leaped over the gate with room to spare, landing on the other side in the realm of the dead itself. The landscape of hell was bleak and cold. Everything was grey and shadowy. The light was dim, coming from no sun, but from a strange luminescence in the air itself, as if the darkness here glowed. There were figures moving in the distance, the shades of the dead, going about whatever business the dead have, but they paid no attention to Hermod. He was alive, and the dead have little interest in the living. He rode on until he came to the hall of Hell herself. It was a great hall, built of bones and shadows, and its name was Eldjudni, which means misery. Hermod dismounted and entered the hall, his heart pounding, his courage wavering but holding. Inside, the hall was vast and cold. At the far end sat Hell on her throne. She was beautiful on one side, and a corpse on the other, her face divided perfectly down the middle. One eye sparkled with life, the other was dull and dead. She watched Hermod approach with both curiosity and indifference. And there, at a place of honor in the hall, sat Baldur and Nanna. They looked pale and insubstantial, like shadows of themselves, but they were recognizable. When Baldur saw Hermod, a flicker of his old light appeared in his face. He rose and embraced his brother, and for a moment Hermod felt warmth, but then it faded, and Baldur was cold again. Hermod stayed the night in Hell's hall. He spoke with Baldur, and Baldur seemed at peace, though sad. He said that death was not terrible, just different. It was like sleeping without dreams, like existing without quite being there. He missed the light and the warmth of Asgard, but the missing was distant, muted, like a memory of feeling rather than feeling itself. In the morning, Hermod approached Hell and made his plea. He spoke of how beloved Baldur was, how his death had grieved all the worlds, how nothing seemed right without him. He asked if there was any way, any possibility, that Baldur could be allowed to return to the living. Hel listened without expression on either half of her faith. When Hermod finished speaking, she was silent for a long time, considering. Finally, she spoke. She said that if it was true that Baldur was as beloved as Hermod claimed, if all the worlds truly grieved for him, then she would release him. But there was a condition. Everything in all of creation must weep for Baldur. Every being, every object, every element of nature must shed tears of grief. If everything wept, then Baldur could return. But if even one thing refused to weep, If even one thing did not grieve for him, then he must remain in her realm forever. Hermod agreed eagerly. Of course everything would weep for Baldur. How could anything not grieve for such a loss? He thanked Hel and turned to leave. Baldur gave him gifts to take back, tokens for Odin and Frigg. Nanna gave him gifts as well, small things to remind those above that she and Baldur were together and at peace. Hermod rode back the way he had come, back across the River Jol, back through the dark valleys and caverns, back up into the light. When he reached Asgard and told the gods of Hel's condition, there was hope for the first time since Baldur had fallen. They could do this. They would do this. They would make all of creation weep. Hash hash, the weeping world. The gods spread out across all the 9 worlds, carrying the news of Hel's condition. They went to every being and told them, "Weep for Baldur, show your grief, and he can return to us." And the world wept. The weeping was immediate and universal. The gods wept, tears streaming down their faces, all their grief pouring out. The giants wept, even though they were often at odds with the gods. The elves wept, both the light elves and the dark elves. The dwarves deep in their mountains wept. The humans in Midgard wept, mourning a god they had never met, but whose loss they could feel in their bones. The animals wept. The wolves howled their sorrow. The bears emerged from their dens to roar their grief. The birds sang sad songs. The fish leapt from the water, and whether it was tears or water that fell from them, it did not matter. They grieved. The trees wept sap. The grasses wept dew. The flowers drooped and shed their petals in mourning. The stones wept, producing moisture from their very substance in ways that stone should not be able to do. The metals deep in the earth wept rust and tarnish. The waters wept themselves, waves crashing in sorrow, rivers running faster, as if hurrying to pour out their grief. The elements wept. Fire wept smoke. Ice wept melting. Wind wept in gusts and gales that sounded like sobbing. Thunder wept booming crashes. Lightning wept bright flashes across dark skies. Everything grieved. The whole of creation poured out its sorrow for the loss of Baldur. The world had never seen such universal mourning. It seemed impossible that anything could remain unmoved by such collective grief. But the gods needed to be certain. They needed to check every corner of creation, to make sure that nothing had been missed. They went to all the places they had already been, confirming the weeping, and then they began to search for anything that might have been overlooked. In a cave at the edge of the world, in a dark and distant place where few ever ventured, one of the gods found a giantess. She was sitting alone in the shadows, and when the god told her the news and asked her to weep for Baldur, she refused. Her name was Thok, and she said she had never loved Baldur. She had never been blessed by his light. She had lived in darkness all her life, and his death meant nothing to her. Let Hel keep what she had. Thok would shed no tears. The god pleaded with her. He explained that if she did not weep, Baldur could not return. All of creation had grieved except her. She alone stood between Baldur and life. Would she not show some compassion? But Thok was unmoved. She said again that she would not weep. In life, Baldur had given her nothing. In death, she would give him nothing. That was her final word. The god returned to Asgard with this terrible news. All the world had wept, except one. One giantess in a distant cave had refused. And because of her refusal, Baldur must remain in Hel's realm forever. The grief that swept through Asgard was almost worse than the grief of his death had been. To come so close to having him back, to have the entire world weep for him, only to be thwarted by one hard-hearted giantess in a dark cave, it was too cruel to bear. But there was worse news to come. Some of the gods became suspicious. They went to the cave where Thok had been found and examined it closely. They looked at the footprints around the cave, at small signs and traces that told a story, and they realized something terrible. Thok was not really a giantess at all. The tracks, the traces, the magic residue, all of it pointed to one conclusion. Thok had been Loki in disguise. Loki, who had shaped the mistletoe dart. Loki, who had guided Hod's hand. Loki, who had caused Baldur's death, either through malice or through a curiosity that cared nothing for consequences. That same Loki had disguised himself as a giantess and refused to weep, ensuring that Baldur could never return. The rage that filled the gods was beyond description. It was not the hot rage of battle, but the cold rage of betrayal. Loki had been their companion, their friend, their brother in Odin's cave. And he had done this. He had taken from them the best thing they had, and then when they had a chance to get it back, he had taken that too. They hunted for Loki. He fled, knowing what was coming, knowing that he had finally gone too far, that this time there would be no forgiveness, no laughing it off, no clever words to escape consequences. He ran and hid, using all his cunning and magic to stay ahead of his pursuers. But the gods were relentless. They searched the mountains and the valleys, the forests and the shores. Finally, they found him hiding by a waterfall, and they seized him. Their judgment was swift and harsh. They took him deep into the earth, to a place where 3 great rocks stood upright. They bound him to the rocks with chains made from the entrails of his own son, chains that would hold even a shapeshifter. Above his head, they placed a serpent that dripped burning venom. The venom would fall on his face, causing him agony beyond imagining. Loki's wife, Sigyn, who loved him despite everything he had done, stationed herself by his side. She held a bowl to catch the venom before it could fall on him. But when the bowl filled, she had to turn away to empty it, and in those moments, the venom would fall on Loki's face. His screams and his thrashing caused earthquakes in the world above. There Loki would remain, bound and tortured, until the end of all things. It was a punishment that fit the crime, the gods thought. He had caused suffering beyond measure. Now, he would suffer beyond measure himself. But punishing Loki did not bring Baldur back. The conditions of hell had not been met. One being had refused to weep, and so Baldur remained in the realm of the dead, and the world remained darker for his absence. Hush! Hush! The changed world. Life in Asgard continued, but it was different now. The golden halls seemed less bright. The gatherings of the gods were quieter, more subdued. There was a shadow over everything, a sense that something precious had been broken and could not be repaired. Frigg withdrew into herself, lost in grief and guilt. She had tried so hard to protect her son. She had traveled throughout all of creation, extracted oaths from everything that existed. But she had missed one thing, one small insignificant plant, and that one oversight had doomed her son. The weight of that failure crushed her. In the quiet of her hall, she would sometimes weep, but the weeping brought no relief. Nothing could ease the pain of such a loss. Odin grew grimmer and more distant. He had always been a god of wisdom and foresight, but now his wisdom seemed like a curse. He had seen this coming. He had known it would happen, but knowing the future and being able to change it are two different things. Sometimes knowledge is just a heavier burden to carry. He spent long hours sitting alone on his high seat, looking out over the worlds with his single eye, seeing everything and finding no comfort in any of it. Hod was consumed with grief and guilt. He had thrown the dart that killed his brother. It did not matter that he had been tricked, that he had not known what he was doing, that he had been blind and unable to see. His hand had done the deed. He wandered Asgard like a ghost himself, speaking to no one, eating little, sleeping less. Some of the gods whispered that he should be punished, but most understood that he was innocent, that the true blame lay with Loki. Still, knowing that in his mind and feeling it in his heart were two different things, Hod felt responsible, and nothing anyone said could convince him otherwise. In time, Hod's grief turned to a kind of desperate determination. In some versions of the story that would be told later, Hod and another of Baldur's brothers, Vali, would become caught in a tragic cycle where Vali, born only to avenge Baldur, would kill Hod. But in the quiet days immediately after Baldur's death, Hod simply existed in misery, a living reminder of how easily something beautiful can be destroyed. Thor threw himself into fighting, seeking out giants and monsters, anything that might die beneath his hammer, as if he could beat the grief out of himself through violence. But no amount of fighting changed anything. Baldur was still dead. The world was still diminished, and Thor would return from his battles to find Asgard just as sad as when he had left. The other gods each dealt with the loss in their own ways. Some withdrew into their own halls and pursuits. Some tried to go on as if nothing had changed, maintaining the routines and rituals of divine life, but their hearts were not in it. Some turned to their own families and held them closer, suddenly aware of how fragile everything was, how quickly beauty could be taken away. In Midgard, among the humans, the loss of Baldur was felt as a change in the world itself. The winters seemed longer and darker. The summers seemed less bright. There was a chill in the air that had not been there before. Not just a physical chill, but a spiritual one, as if something vital had gone out of creation. The stories began to spread among humans. They told of the beautiful god who had died, of the treachery that had brought him down, of the quest to bring him back, and how it had failed. They told the story to their children, and their children told it to their children, and the story became a part of the fabric of the world. A reminder that even the gods were not immune to loss, that even in paradise there was sorrow, that beauty and goodness did not guarantee safety or permanence. Some humans built shrines to Baldur's memory. They would leave offerings of flowers and light, trying in their small way to honor the god of light who had been taken from the world. They would pray not to him, for he was dead and could not answer, but for him, asking whatever powers might listen to remember him and mourn him. In Hel's realm, Baldur waited. Time moved strangely in the land of the dead. It did not rush or crawl, but simply existed, each moment the same as every other moment, an eternal now that never changed and never ended. Baldur and Nanna stayed together in that grey place. They did not suffer, exactly. There was no pain in Hel's realm, but there was no joy either. There was only a kind of muted existence, a shadow of life, a memory of being rather than being itself. Sometimes Baldur would think of Asgard. He would remember the golden halls and the green meadows. He would remember his hall Breidablik, where no evil thing could come. He would remember the sunlight and the laughter of his friends. But the memories were distant, seen as if through thick glass, felt as if through heavy cloth. They did not hurt, but they brought no comfort either. He knew that his death had grieved the worlds. He knew that Hermod had come to plead for his return. He knew about Hel's condition, and that all the world had wept, except one. He knew that Loki had been the one to refuse, ensuring that Baldur must remain in death. But knowing these things did not stir anger in him. The dead do not feel anger. They do not feel much of anything. They simply are. Nanna stayed close to him, as she had in life. In some ways, it was almost peaceful, this existence without striving, without worry, without the bright intensity of living. But it was not life. It was not the world they had known. It was just an ending that went on and on without end. The other dead in Hel's realm were of all kinds. Warriors who had not died in battle, and so could not go to Valhalla. People who had died of sickness or age or accident. They moved through the grey landscape like smoke, sometimes forming groups, sometimes drifting alone, all of them locked in this eternal twilight. Baldur became, in a sense, a light, even in that dark place. The dead were drawn to him, as living things had been drawn to him when he lived. They would gather near him, not speaking, just existing in his presence, as if some faint echo of his former brightness still clung to him and offered them a small comfort in their eternal night. And so Baldur waited in the land of the dead, and the world above went on without him, dimmer and colder, carrying the weight of his absence like a wound that would not heal. Hush, hush, the prophecy fulfilled. The death of Baldur was not just a tragedy. It was also a sign. The wise among the gods knew that it marked the beginning of something larger, something darker. It was the first crack in the foundation of the world, the first sign that the age of the gods was ending. There were prophecies, old as the world itself, that spoke of how things would end. Ragnarok, they called it, the doom of the gods, the twilight of everything. The prophecies said that there would be signs of its approach. Brother would turn against brother. Father would fight son. Winter would come and not end. 3 winters without summer, cold and darkness spreading across all the world. The chains that bound the great wolf Fenrir would break. The world serpent would rise from the ocean. The dead would break free from Hel's realm. and sail forth in a ship made of the fingernails of corpses. Loki would break free from his bonds and lead the forces of chaos against the gods. And in the final battle, the gods would fall. Odin would be swallowed by Fenrir. Thor would slay the world serpent, but die from its poison. One by one, the great gods would meet their end. Asgard would burn. The world tree, Yggdrasil, would tremble. The 9 worlds would be consumed by fire and flood. Everything would end. But the prophecies also said that ending was not truly the end. After Ragnarok, after the fire and the flood, after everything had been destroyed, the world would rise again. Green and beautiful, it would emerge from the waters, fresh and new. A few gods would survive, including Baldur. He would return from Hel's realm when the old world was destroyed and the new world was born. He would emerge into the light once more, and with him would come Hod, his brother, the two of them reconciled. The tragedy of the mistletoe forgotten in the newness of creation. In this new world, Baldur would be a teacher and a guide. He would help establish the new order, the new way of being. His wisdom, gained through death and return, would help ensure that the new world was better than the old one, that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. So his death, terrible as it was also necessary in the grand pattern of things. It was the beginning of the end, yes, but also the promise of a new beginning. Without death, there can be no rebirth. Without ending, there can be no renewal. Baldur had to die, so that in time he could live again, so that the world could be made new. This is perhaps small comfort to those who grieve. Knowing that someone will return in a distant future does not ease the pain of their absence now. Knowing that an ending will lead to a new beginning does not make the ending any less hard to bear. The gods who mourned Baldur could not be consoled by prophecies of a distant age when he would return. They could only feel the loss in the present moment, the empty space where he had been, the absence of his light. But the prophecies were there nonetheless, whispered in the halls of Asgard, remembered by those who kept the old knowledge. Baldur would return. Not soon. Not in any time that could be measured or counted, but eventually. When the world died, he would live. When everything ended, he would begin again. That was the promise. The hope. The thin thread of light in the darkness of his death. Hush, hush, the mourning hall. In the years that followed Baldur's death, the gods created a memorial to him. In the place where Breidablik had stood, they built a new hall, a hall of remembrance. It was not as bright as Breidablik had been. Nothing could match that radiance. But it was beautiful in its own way. Beautiful with the beauty of sadness, of memory, of love that endures beyond loss. The walls were carved with scenes from Baldur's life. Here was shown his birth, light streaming from the infant in his mother's arms. Here was shown his youth, playing with his brother Hod, the two of them inseparable. Here was shown his wedding to Nanna, the two of them standing hand in hand. Here was shown his judgment of disputes, his wisdom bringing justice to difficult situations. Here were the games, the gods throwing things at him, his smile as he stood untouched. And here, too, was shown his death, the mistletoe dart in flight, his fall, the grief of those around him, his funeral ship ablaze on the water. These scenes were not shown out of cruelty or a desire to dwell on pain, but as an acknowledgement of truth. This had happened. This was real. To honor Baldur fully, they had to acknowledge both his life and his death, both the joy he brought and the sorrow of his loss. The gods would come to this hall when they needed to remember, when the weight of his absence became too heavy to bear alone. They would sit in the quiet spaces and think of him. They would trace the carvings with their fingers, as if touching the images could somehow connect them to the reality they depicted. They would speak his name, quietly, reverently, keeping his memory alive. Frigg came often. She would sit for hours, looking at the image of Baldur as a child. Sometimes she would speak to it, telling it things, news from Asgard, small happenings that he would have wanted to know. She knew it was foolish, knew that carved stone could not hear her, but it comforted her nonetheless. It gave her somewhere to direct her love, her grief, all the feelings that had nowhere else to go. Odin came less often, but when he did, he would stay longer. He would sit in the deepest shadow of the hall and think about fate and wisdom, and the burden of knowing too much. He would wonder if he could have changed things, if there was some action he could have taken, some word he could have spoken, but he knew the answer was no. Fate is fate. What is written will be. Still, the wondering persisted, a question that had no answer but demanded to be asked nonetheless. The other gods came too, each bringing their own particular grief, their own memories. They would tell stories of Baldur, reminding each other of his kindness, his wisdom, his light. The stories became a kind of ritual, a way of keeping him present, even in his absence. As long as they remembered, as long as they told the tales, he was not completely gone. And slowly, very slowly, the sharp edge of grief began to dull. It never went away. The pain of his loss remained. But it became something they could live with, something they could carry. Life, even divine life, continued. There were still duties to perform, still worlds to watch over, still the daily business of being God. They could not stop everything and mourn forever. They had to go on, but they would change. All of them would change. The experience of losing Baldur had taught them something about the fragility of beauty, the impermanence of joy, the reality of endings. They were a little wiser, perhaps, but also a little sadder. They had learned that even gods can lose what they love, that even in Asgard there is sorrow, that nothing, no matter how beautiful or beloved, is truly safe from the darkness that waits at the edge of all things. Hush, hush, the lessons of loss. Over time, the story of Baldur came to mean different things to different people. To some, it was a story about the danger of jealousy and spite. Loki's actions, born from resentment and a twisted kind of curiosity, had destroyed something precious. The lesson was clear: guard against the dark impulses in your own heart. Do not let envy or malice take root. Do not act on cruel whims, just to see what will happen. To others, it was a story about the limits of protection. Frigg had tried to save her son. She had done everything possible, traveling throughout all of creation, extracting oaths, building a shield of promises around him. But she had missed one thing, one small thing, and that had been enough. The lesson was that perfect safety is impossible. You cannot protect against everything. At some point, you have to accept that risk is part of existence, that danger cannot be completely eliminated, that loss is always possible, no matter how hard you try to prevent it. To still others, it was a story about innocence and vulnerability. Baldur was so good, so pure, so innocent of malice, that he could not imagine someone would want to harm him. He stood in the center of the field, and let the gods throw things at him because he trusted in his protection, trusted in the love of those around him. But innocence is not armor. Goodness is not a shield. The world can be cruel, even to those who do not deserve cruelty. The lesson was to be aware, to be cautious, to understand that not everyone has good intentions. To the gods themselves, the story was about the inevitability of fate. Odin had seen it coming. The dreams had warned them. Despite all their efforts, despite Frigg's quest and Hermod's journey and the weeping of the world, Baldur had died and remained dead. The lesson was that some things cannot be changed, that destiny will unfold as it is written, that struggling against fate is ultimately futile. This was a hard lesson, a bitter one, but one they had to learn. But perhaps the deepest lesson was about love and grief. Love makes us vulnerable. To love something is to give it the power to hurt you. To care deeply about someone is to open yourself to the possibility of loss. Frigg loved Baldur so much that his death nearly destroyed her. The other gods loved him so much that his absence left a permanent wound in their heart. Would it have been better not to love so deeply, to care less, to protect themselves from the pain of loss? No. The answer was no. Even knowing how it would end, even knowing the grief that would come. Loving Baldur had been worth it. The joy he brought while he lived far outweighed the sorrow of his death. The light he cast was worth the darkness that followed its extinguishing. To have had him even briefly was better than never to have had him at all. This is perhaps the hardest truth. That love and loss are inseparable, that to choose one is to accept the other, that the depth of our grief is a measure of the depth of our love. The gods, in losing Baldur, learned what mortals have always known, that beauty is temporary, that all things end, that separation is the price we pay for connection. But they also learned that memory endures, that love, once given, continues even after its object is gone, that the impact someone makes on the world does not disappear when they do. Baldur was gone, yes, but the world he had touched was forever changed by his presence. The kindness he had shown inspired kindness in others. The peace he had created in Breidablik remained as an ideal, a goal, a reminder of what was possible. The love he had given and received continued to ripple outward through the worlds, touching lives he had never met, influencing events he could never know about. Hush hush, the seasons turn. As the years passed and became decades, and the decades became centuries, the world continued its cycles. Spring came and went, summer blazed and faded, autumn harvested and finished, winter froze and thawed. The seasons turned as they always had, indifferent to the grief of gods or the loss of light. In Midgard, the humans who had heard the story of Baldur passed it down to their children, and their children passed it to their children's children. The story changed a little with each telling, as stories do. Some details were added, others were forgotten, but the core remained the same. The beautiful god who died, the treachery of the trickster, the grief of the world, the failed attempt to bring him back, the promise that someday, in a new world, he would return. The story became especially important during the darkest time of the year, when winter held the world in its grip, and the nights were long and cold. People would gather around fires and tell the tale of Baldur, the god of light who was taken from the world. They would remember that even in the darkest times, light had once existed and would exist again. They would hold onto the promise that Baldur would return. That darkness was not the end, that renewal would come. Some humans began to mark the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, as a time to honor Baldur's memory. They would light candles and fires, creating their own light to stand against the darkness. They would bring evergreen branches into their homes, symbols of life that persisted even when everything else seemed dead. They would gather together, share food and warmth, tell stories and sing songs, keeping the darkness at bay with human connection and remembered joy. These rituals were not just about Baldur, of course. They were about humanity's own struggle against the cold and dark, about the universal need for light and warmth and hope. But Baldur's story gave these rituals extra meaning, connecting human experience to divine truth, reminding people that even the gods knew sorrow, that loss was part of the fabric of existence, that endurance and memory and hope were how one survived the darkness. In Asgard, the gods also marked the turning of the seasons, but for them, each year was a reminder of how long Baldur had been gone. Time, which moves so differently for the divine than for mortals, still moved. Days accumulated into years, years into centuries. The world aged. The gods aged, though not in body, but in spirit, in weariness, in the weight of all they had seen and done and lost. Thor continued his battles against the giants and monsters that threatened the ordered world. But there was a grimness to him now that had not been there before. He fought not with joy, but with duty, with the understanding that this was his role, his purpose, even if it brought him no happiness. Each giant he defeated, each monster he slew, was just another task completed, another threat removed, another day survived. The glory of battle, which had once thrilled him, now felt hollow. Odin continued to seek wisdom, to gather knowledge, to prepare for the future he knew was coming. He traveled to distant places, consulted with wise beings, learned secrets that most would rather not know. But the wisdom he gathered only made him sadder. Knowing the future, knowing how everything would end, was a burden that grew heavier with each passing year. Sometimes he wondered if ignorance might be a blessing, if not knowing might make existence lighter. But he could not unknow what he knew. He could only carry it and prepare as best he could for the inevitable end. Frigg remained in her hall, tending to the domestic affairs of Asgard, watching over the other gods and their families, offering counsel and comfort where she could. But a part of her remained frozen in the moment of Baldur's death, forever standing on that field, forever watching him fall. She functioned, she continued, but the joy had gone out of her. She performed her duties because duties must be performed, but her heart was with her son in the land of the dead, waiting for the day when he would return. Hud eventually found a kind of peace, though it took many years. The guilt never fully left him, but he learned to live with it, to understand that he had been a tool in someone else's hands, that the true responsibility lay with Loki. He learned to forgive himself, slowly and painfully, the way one learns to walk again after a terrible injury. And in his darkness, in the world of blindness where he lived, he found a kind of wisdom, an understanding of things that those with sight could not see. He became known for his insight, his ability to perceive truths that others missed, as if losing his sight had given him a different way of seeing. The other gods each found their own ways to continue. Some threw themselves into their particular domains, tending to the aspects of the world for which they were responsible. Some withdrew into themselves, becoming more isolated, more distant. Some sought distraction in feasts and stories, and the pleasures available to divine being. All of them, in their own ways, learned to live with the absence of Baldur, the way one learns to live with a missing limb, aware of it always, functioning despite it, but never quite whole. The world grows older. As the centuries passed, the world itself began to show signs of age. The winters grew longer and harder. The summers became shorter and less bright. Conflicts erupted more often between the various beings of the nine worlds. The giants grew bolder in their challenges to the gods. The wolves that chased the sun and moon across the sky drew closer to their prey. The great wolf Fenrir, bound with magic chains, tested his bonds more frequently, and each time the chains groaned and stretched a little further before holding. The world tree Yggdrasil, which held all the worlds together in its roots and branches, began to show signs of strain. Its leaves were not as green as they once had been. Its bark grew rough and scarred. The creatures that gnawed at its roots seemed to be doing more damage. The dragon that lived among its roots, Nidhogg, chewed with increased vigor, as if sensing that time was growing short. These were the signs that those who knew the prophecies recognized. The age of the gods was approaching its end. Ragnarok was drawing near. The doom that had been foretold since the beginning of time was starting to unfold. Loki, bound in his torment beneath the earth, felt the changes too. The serpent above him dripped its venom, and he screamed and thrashed, and the earthquakes his movements caused grew more violent. His bonds, made from his son's entrails and turned to iron by magic, were beginning to weaken. Not much, not quickly, but enough that he could feel it. The day would come when he would break free, and when he did, he would lead the forces of chaos against the gods. Not because he wanted to, necessarily, but because that was his role in the story, his part in the pattern. He had started the end when he caused Baldur's death. Now he would finish it. In Hell's realm, the dead were stirring. They felt the change coming too, a loosening of the bonds that held them in the grey land. When Ragnarok came, they would be released. They would sail forth in Naglfar, the ship made of the fingernails of the dead, and they would join the final battle. Even the dead had a role to play in the end of all things. Baldur felt the stirring too, in the way that the dead feel things, which is dimly and distantly. He knew that something was coming, some great change. He did not fear it. The dead do not fear. But there was a sense of anticipation, a waiting for something that had always been meant to happen. He held Nanna's hand, and they waited together in the grey lands for the future to arrive. The last days. The signs became unmistakable. The Fimbul winter began, 3 winters with no summer in between. Snow fell constantly. Ice covered the land. The sun barely rose above the horizon, and when it did, its light was weak and cold. Crops failed. Animals died. In Midgard, humans huddled together for warmth and wondered if the world was ending. Some of them remembered the old stories, the prophecies of Ragnarok, and knew that this was the beginning of the end. Brother turned against brother. Father fought son. Old bonds of kinship and loyalty shattered under the pressure of cold and hunger and fear. The moral fabric of the world began to unravel. Lies and betrayals multiplied. Violence erupted everywhere. The ordered world that the gods had maintained for so long began to collapse into chaos. The wolves that chased the sun and moon finally caught their prey. The sun was swallowed, and the world was plunged into darkness. The moon disappeared next. The stars went out one by one. Darkness covered everything. A darkness deeper than night. A darkness that felt final and absolute. The earth shook. Mountains crumbled. The seas rose and flooded the lands. From the depths of the ocean, the world's serpent, Jormungandr, rose. It was so vast that when it opened its mouth, the bottom jaw scraped the earth and the top jaw touched the sky. Poison dripped from its fangs, fouling the air and the water. Fenrir broke his chains at last. The great wolf, which had been bound since he was young, which had grown enormous in his imprisonment, was finally free. He howled with rage and joy, a sound that echoed across all the 9 worlds. His mouth opened wide, the upper jaw reaching to the sky, the lower jaw to the earth. He would swallow everything if he could. Loki broke free from his bonds beneath the earth. He emerged twisted and changed by his long torment, filled with rage at the gods who had bound him, ready to lead the forces of chaos against them. The giants rallied to him. The dead sailed forth in Naglfar. The fire giants marched from their realm of Muspelheim, led by Surtur with his flaming sword. The gods prepared for battle. They armed themselves with their finest weapons. They gathered their allies. They made their plans, though they knew from prophecy how it would end. Odin would face Fenrir and be swallowed. Thor would kill Jormungandr but die from its poison. Tyr would fall fighting the hound Garm. Heimdall and Loki would slay each other. One by one, the great gods would fall. But they would fight anyway, because that was what gods did. They would stand against chaos and destruction knowing they would lose, because the alternative was to surrender without resistance, to let the darkness win without opposition. Better to fall fighting than to yield without struggle. The battle was joined on a great plain called Vigrid. Gods and giants, monsters and heroes, the living and the dead, all came together in a clash that shook the foundations of reality. The sky split open. The earth cracked and broke. Fire and ice, darkness, and what little light remained, all swirled together in a chaos of destruction. The prophecies were fulfilled. Odin fell to Fenrir, though Fenrir was then slain by Odin's son Vidar. Thor killed Jormungandr, but managed only 9 steps before the serpent's poison finished him. The gods fell one by one, their bodies adding to the carnage on the field of Vigrid. Asgard burned. The rainbow bridge that connected the realms shattered. The world tree trembled and groaned. Surtur, the fire giant, struck the final blow. He raised his flaming sword and set the entire world ablaze. Fire consumed everything. The 9 worlds burned. The earth sank into the sea. The stars fell from the sky. Darkness and fire and water swallowed all that had been. Everything ended. Hush, hush, the new beginning. But endings are not truly endings. Death is not the final word. In the depths of the sea, in the heart of the darkness, something waited. Life waiting to return. Light waiting to shine again. The waters receded. The fires cooled. Slowly, slowly, the earth rose again from the sea. It was green, greener than it had ever been before. The grass was thick and soft. Flowers bloomed in abundance. Trees grew, their leaves bright and healthy. The sun emerged, new and brilliant, more beautiful than the old sun had been. A new moon appeared. New stars sparkled in a clean sky. It was the same world, but also different. It was new, fresh, unmarked by the ages of struggle and sorrow that had come before. The mistakes of the past had been burned away. The old corruption had been cleansed. This was a chance to begin again, to do better, to create something purer and more lasting. Some of the gods had survived. Not the great ones, not Odin or Thor, or the gods who had led the old world. They had fallen in the battle, as prophesied. But some of the younger gods, some of the less prominent ones, had survived. Vidar and Vali, sons of Odin. Modi and Magni, sons of Thor. Others who had found shelter or had been protected by fate because they had roles to play in the new world. And from Hel's realm, from the land of the dead, two figures emerged into the light. Baldur and Hod, the brothers whose deaths had marked the beginning of the end, now returned to mark the new beginning. They came walking out of the realm of the dead, not as shades or ghosts, but as living beings, whole and restored. Baldur looked around at the new world with wonder. Color and light and warmth surrounded him after so long in the grey land. He could feel the grass beneath his feet. He could smell the flowers. He could hear the birds singing. He was alive, truly alive, in a way he had not been since the mistletoe dart had pierced his heart so long ago. Hod stood beside him, and in this new world, a miracle had occurred. Hod could see. His blindness, which had been part of him for all his existence in the old world, was gone. He looked at his brother, seeing him for the first time, seeing the beauty that everyone had always told him about, seeing with his own eyes the light that Baldur radiated. He wept with joy. The brothers embraced, and in that embrace, all the tragedy of the past was healed. The guilt and grief, the sorrow and separation, all of it was washed away. They were together again, and they were whole, and the new world stretched before them full of possibility. Nanna was there too, returned from death with Baldur. She stood in the new world, holding her husband's hand, marveling at the freshness of everything. They were together again, and this time there would be no mistletoe dart, no treachery, no death. This was a new age, a better age, an age where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. The surviving gods gathered in a place where Asgard had once stood. There was no Asgard anymore, no great halls of the gods, but there would be new halls built in time. For now, they sat together in the green grass and talked. They remembered the old world, the old gods, the battles, and the sorrows. They spoke the names of those who had fallen. Odin, Thor, Frigga, all the great ones who had died so that this new world could be born. Baldur told them about his time in Hel's realm, about the long wait in the grey lands, about the muted existence of the dead. He told them how he had felt the world changing, how he had known that something great and terrible was happening, how he had waited with patience for the moment of return. He described the journey from death to life, how it had felt to step from grey into green, from cold into warmth, from shadow into sunlight. The gods listened, and they understood something important. The new world had been bought with sacrifice. It had been paid for with the lives of the old gods. It had been made possible by the ending of all things. They had a responsibility now, a duty to make this new beginning worth the cost. They had to build something better, something that would last, something that honored the memory of those who had fallen. They found golden game pieces in the grass, pieces from games the old gods had played. These pieces had somehow survived the fire and the flood, had been preserved through the ending of the world. The gods picked them up, marveling at this connection to the past, this small thread of continuity between the old world and the new. They would keep these pieces, treasure them, remember through them the old days and the old ways, while also creating new days and new ways. Hush hush, the new order. In the new world, Baldur became a teacher and a guide. His wisdom gained through death and return made him uniquely qualified to help establish the new order. He taught the other gods about compassion and forgiveness. He taught them about the importance of wisdom over strength, of peace over glory, of nurturing over conquest. He helped them understand that the old world had fallen partly because it had been built on competition and conflict, on the glory of battle and the exercise of power. The new world would need to be different. Hod, with his newfound sight, offered a different kind of wisdom. Having lived in blindness for so long, having learned to perceive the world through senses other than sight, he understood things in a unique way. He taught about different ways of knowing, about truths that cannot be seen with eyes, about the importance of listening and feeling and understanding, rather than just looking and judging. Together, the brothers complemented each other, Baldur's light and Hod's insight combining to create a balanced wisdom. The gods began to build new halls, but these halls were different from the old ones. They were simpler, more connected to the earth and the natural world. There was less gold and silver, less ostentation and display. Instead, there was beauty and simplicity, in the grain of wood and the shape of stone, in the way light fell through windows, and the way wind moved through open spaces. These halls were built for living, not for impressing. They were built for peace, not for war. The surviving gods also decided that the new world should have humans in it. 2 humans had survived Ragnarok, having hidden themselves in the wood of the world tree during the destruction. Their names were Life and Lifthrasir, which meant life and eager for life. They emerged into the new world and began to repopulate it. But these humans would have a different relationship with the gods than the old humans had. They would be more equal, more respected. The gods would guide them but not rule them. They would teach them but not command them. Baldur took a special interest in the humans. He would walk among them, teaching them about kindness and justice, about building communities that were based on mutual care rather than force and fear. The humans loved him, as all beings loved Baldur, and they built their new societies based on the principles he taught them. They created laws that were fair. They built towns where people worked together for the common good. They made art and music that celebrated life and beauty rather than war and conquest. The new world grew and flourished. Forests spread across the lands, thick and green and full of life. Rivers ran clean and clear. Animals multiplied. The air was sweet. The seasons turned gently, each bringing its own gifts, none too harsh or too cruel. It was as if the world itself had learned from the destruction of the old world, had understood the lesson, and was applying it, creating something more balanced, more sustainable, more fundamentally good. There were still challenges, of course. Life could not exist without some struggle, some obstacles to overcome. But the challenges were not the existential threats that had plagued the old world. There were no giants plotting the destruction of the gods. There was no great serpent waiting to poison the sea. There was no bound wolf growing stronger in its rage. The forces of chaos had been defeated, and while chaos could never be completely eliminated, it had been reduced to manageable levels, to natural disorder rather than malevolent destruction. Years passed in the new world, and they were good years. The gods lived in harmony with each other and with the world around them. The humans thrived, building civilizations that were wise and just. The natural world flourished in all its abundance and variety. It was in many ways paradise regained. The golden age returned, the world as it was meant to be before the long ages of struggle and sorrow had twisted it into something harder and darker. And Baldur, walking through this new world, finally understood why he had to die. His death had not been meaningless. It had been the crack in the old world's foundation that had eventually brought the whole structure down, making way for something better. His death had been the beginning of the end, yes. But that end had been necessary for this new beginning. The grief his death had caused had been real and terrible, but it had led to this moment, to this new world where grief could be healed and loss could be redeemed. He thought sometimes about Loki, about the trickster who had caused his death. Loki had died in Ragnarok, falling in mutual destruction with Heimdall. Baldur wondered if Loki would return in time, if even he would be redeemed and restored. In this new world, where old wounds were healed, where old enemies were reconciled, was there room for Loki? Baldur did not know, but he hoped so. He hoped that eventually everyone could find peace, even those who had done terrible things, even those who had caused great harm. Forgiveness, after all, was one of the principles of the new world. Hush, hush, the eternal spring. Time moved forward in the new world, but it moved differently than it had in the old world. There was less urgency, less sense of rushing towards some inevitable doom. The gods knew that this world would last, that they had learned the lessons of the past and would not repeat the old mistakes. The prophecy of Ragnarok had been fulfilled. Destruction had come and gone. Now, there was only the endless unfolding of a peaceful future. Baldur and Nanna had a home in the new world, a simple hall surrounded by gardens. It was not Breidablik, but it reminded them of it. Here they lived quietly, receiving visitors, offering counsel, tending their gardens, enjoying the simple pleasures of existence. They had children in the new world, children who would never know the sorrows of the old world, who would grow up in peace and beauty and safety. Baldur would often walk through the world, traveling far and wide, seeing all the places where life was flourishing. He would visit the human settlements and see how they were progressing. He would walk through the forests and speak with the animals and the trees. He would climb mountains and swim in lakes and lie in meadows, watching clouds drift across the sky. Having been dead for so long, having spent ages in the grey lands where nothing really lived, he found infinite joy in simply being alive, in experiencing the world with all his senses, in feeling connected to the great web of life that surrounded him. Had often accompanied him on these walks. The two brothers would travel together, talking about deep things and shallow things, about philosophy and about the weather, about the nature of existence and about what they would have for dinner. Their companionship, interrupted so tragically in the old world, was now restored and strengthened. They understood each other in a way that only those who have shared great sorrow and great joy can understand each other. Sometimes, when they walked, they would come across the golden game pieces scattered in the grass, remnants of the old world, still appearing now and then. They would pick them up and hold them for a moment, remembering. They would think about Odin and Frigg, about Thor and the other gods who had fallen. They would remember the good times and the bad times, the laughter and the tears, the glory and the grief. And then they would carefully place the pieces back in the grass and continue their walk, carrying the memory but not dwelling in it, honoring the past while living fully in the present. The humans in the new world began to tell stories, as humans always do. They told stories about the old world, about the gods who had lived and died before. They told the story of Ragnarok, of the great destruction and the new beginning. And always, they told the story of Baldur, the beautiful god who died, the treachery that brought him down, his journey to the land of the dead, and his eventual return. The story had changed from the old world to the new, had shifted from tragedy to triumph, from a tale of loss to a tale of redemption. But at its heart, it remained the same story. A story about light and darkness, about death and rebirth, about the endurance of hope, even in the face of terrible sorrow. Parents would tell this story to their children at night, in the quiet moments before sleep. They would speak of how Baldur walked among them still, how he taught them about kindness and justice, how his light still shone in the world. The children would listen, their eyes growing heavy, drifting off to sleep with images of a beautiful god walking through green meadows, bringing peace wherever he went. Hush, hush, the endless day. In the new world, there came to be a special time each year, a festival celebrating Baldur's return. It was held in the spring, when the world was at its greenest and most alive, when flowers bloomed everywhere and the air was sweet with their scent. People from all over would gather to celebrate, to remember the story, to give thanks for the new world and all its blessings. The festival lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. During this time, people would light candles and fires, creating a sea of light that could be seen from far away. They would bring flowers and green branches, decorating their homes and the public spaces. They would share food and drink, feast together, strengthen the bonds of community. They would tell stories and sing songs, many of them about Baldur, about his kindness and his wisdom, about his death and his return. On the final night of the festival, when the celebrations reached their peak, Baldur himself would sometimes appear. He would walk among the people, not as a god demanding worship, but as a friend joining in the joy. He would talk with people, listen to their stories, share in their happiness. His presence at the festival was never announced or guaranteed, but when he came, it made the celebration complete, a living connection to the story they were honoring, proof that the light had truly returned to the world. The gods of the new world did not seek worship in the way the old gods had. They did not need sacrifices or grand temples. They did not demand obedience or tribute. Instead, they walked among humans as teachers and friends, as guides and companions. They were still gods, still possessing power and wisdom beyond mortal understanding. But they used their power to nurture rather than to dominate, to support rather than to control. Baldur embodied this new relationship between gods and humans perfectly. He was respected and loved, yes, but not feared. He was honored but not worshipped. People came to him with their problems and their questions, and he helped them find their own answers, guided them toward their own wisdom. He did not tell them what to do, but showed them how to think, how to consider, how to make choices that aligned with their values and supported the greater good. The world became a reflection of Baldur's teachings. Communities were built on principles of mutual care. Disputes were settled through discussion and understanding rather than through violence. Resources were shared rather than hoarded. The strong protected the weak. The wise taught the ignorant. The fortunate helped the unfortunate. It was not perfect, because nothing in existence can be perfect, but it was good. It was better. It was a world where beauty and kindness could flourish, where the gentle could live without fear, where light was stronger than darkness. As centuries passed in the new world, the story of the old world began to fade into legend. The humans who had survived Ragnarok, life, and Lithrasir eventually died of old age, having lived long and good lives. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren spread across the world, and with each generation, the memories of the old world grew dimmer. Eventually, only the gods remembered what had been before, remembered the old Asgard and the old Earth, remembered the struggles and the sorrows of the age that had ended, but they kept the memories alive through stories. They told the new generations about the old gods, about Odin's wisdom and Thor's strength, about Frigg's love and Tyr's courage. They told about the mistakes that had been made, the hubris and the violence, the conflicts that had weakened the old world from within long before Ragnarok destroyed it from without. These stories were not meant to glorify the past but to teach, to ensure that the lessons learned at such terrible cost would not be forgotten. And always, they told the story of Baldur, how he had lived and died and returned, how his death had been the beginning of the end, and how his return had been the sign of the new beginning. The story had become mythology, the foundation story of the new world, the tale that explained how things came to be, and why they were the way they were. Hush, hush, the peace that endures. In the quiet of evening, when the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Baldur would often sit outside his hall and simply exist. He would watch the light change as the sun descended toward the horizon. He would listen to the sounds of the world settling into night, the birds' song changing, the insects beginning their evening chorus, the wind shifting in the trees. These moments of simple presence, of just being alive and aware and part of the world, brought him deep contentment. Nana would come and sit beside him, and they would watch the sunset together in companionable silence. Sometimes they would hold hands. Sometimes they would talk quietly about small things, about their day, about their children, about plans for tomorrow or next week or next season. Sometimes they would just sit, together in the quietness, needing no words because their connection went deeper than language. These peaceful moments were what the new world was about, Baldur thought. Not grand adventures or mighty deeds or the glory of great accomplishments, but simple contentment, simple connection, simple joy in being alive and sharing that life with those you love. The old world had been too focused on greatness, on power and glory and immortal fame. The new world understood that greatness was in the small things, in kindness and presence, and the daily choice to nurture rather than destroy. Hod would often join them for these evening vigils. He would sit on Baldur's other side, his newly seeing eyes drinking in the beauty of the sunset, still marveling even after all this time at the gift of sight. The three of them would sit together, and sometimes other gods would come, and sometimes humans would come, and they would all share the peace of the evening, the quiet joy of community and connection. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Baldur would sometimes speak. He would tell stories, or share thoughts, or simply observe something beautiful about the moment. His voice was gentle, never demanding attention, just offering his words to anyone who wanted to hear them. And people would listen, not because they had to, but because his words carried wisdom and kindness, because listening to him made them feel more peaceful, more centered, more connected to something larger than themselves. When full darkness fell and the stars were brilliant overhead, people would drift away to their homes and their bed. Baldur and Nanna would go into their hall, and they would lie down together, and they would sleep. Baldur's sleep now was peaceful, undisturbed by dark dreams or portents of doom. He slept deeply and well, and when he woke in the morning, he woke to another day in a world where he was safe, where he was loved, where he could live without fear of mistletoe darts, or treachery, or death. This was the gift the new world had given him. Not just life, but peace. Not just existence, but joy. Not just survival, but flourishing. After the long ages in the grey lands, after the sorrow of his death and the grief it had caused, he had been given a chance to truly live, to experience life fully and deeply, to be present in each moment without shadows hanging over. And he was grateful. Every day, he was grateful. Grateful for the sunrise and the sunset, for the grass beneath his feet and the sky above his head. Grateful for Nana and Hod, and all the others who shared his life. Grateful for the humans who built their good societies and lived their good lives. Grateful for the animals and the trees, for the flowers and the streams, for every element of the living world that surrounded him. Grateful simply to be alive, to be here, to be part of this great web of existence. The new world continued, day after day, season after season, year after year. It would continue, the gods believed, forever. There would be no second Ragnarok. The cycle of destruction and rebirth had been completed. Now there was only the endless day of the new world, the eternal spring, the peace that would endure. And in that peace, Baldur walked, the god of light and beauty, who had died and returned, who had been mourned by all creation and had come back when the world was made new. He walked through the green meadows and the quiet forest. He walked beside the clear streams and over the gentle hills. He walked with purpose and without purpose, going somewhere and going nowhere, simply moving through the world he loved, the world that loved him, the world that would be his home forever. His light shone, not with the intensity of the old days, perhaps, but with a steadier, gentler glow. It was the light of peace, of contentment, of a life well lived and appreciated. It was the light that guides without blinding, that warms without burning, that illuminates without harsh glare. It was the light the new world needed, the light that would keep the darkness at bay, not through force, but through persistent, gentle presence. And so, the story ends, though it is not really an ending. Baldur lives. The world flourishes. The light continues to shine. The story that began with bad dreams and ended with death had, after all, a happy ending. Or perhaps it is better to say that it had a new beginning, a chance to start over, a promise that even after the darkest night, morning will come. In the new world, Baldur would live forever, or as close to forever as anything can be. He would teach and guide, love and be loved, walk through the beautiful world and appreciate every moment of it. He was home, he was safe, he was happy, and the world was better for his presence in it. The light had returned, and it would never go out again.